Hello, 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 everyone. This is Twoana-Episode coming back to you again with Talk About It with Twoana. This is the show where we discuss myths and misconceptions surrounding mental health, and we do our best to get you and your loved ones connected with the resources needed to live a more abundant life. Today, I have my special guest with me, Miss Brittany Talley.
Hello.
And as always, I'm going to allow her to introduce herself, tell you where she's from, tell you what she does, and then we're going to get into this topic. So, today's topic is kids, stress, and the holidays. Right? So, as always, I want to welcome you all who are watching. Thank you so much for taking your time out. Please feel free to comment if you are watching via Facebook Live. If you are watching via YouTube, you also can comment. Make sure that you like this, share this, especially with anyone that you know could use the information. So, without further ado, we're going to get into this discussion. And you all know that we just kind of have a conversation. Yeah. So, they're watching us, but we'll be talking to each other because we like this to be raw, unscripted.
Okay,
right?
cool.
And so we're just going to have a chit-chat about the topic.
Okay.
So, usually I start out with a huge emphasis on myths.
Okay.
But after we started talking more about what we're going to discuss today, then I found out about, unfortunately, another child that we lost due to suicide recently. I think she was a 9-year-old. And there was a huge correlation between some bullying and all of that. So we're not changing the topic so much as I think I want to put more emphasis on tips and our insight to how to help parents, caregivers, educators, whoever might be watching this, really help our littles. That's what I call them, our littles, right? So before we get started, though, I want you to introduce yourself.
Okay.
Tell everybody, kind of what you do.
Sure.
Where you, all that.
Yeah, okay. Well, my name is Brittany Talley. I'm a licensed professional counselor and a registered play therapist. Mostly I work with youth ages 4 to 12. That's kind of my big group, is that little bitty group. Okay. And I really specialize in working with children of color, especially when one or both of their parents is of a different race. So kids who are from multiracial families or they're adopted. And so that's kind of my specialty. And so I have a lot of little brown kids running in and out of my office, which is really fun. So we talk a lot about structure and consistency and attachment in my work, and I'm a pretty child-centered, attachment-focused therapist, so I do a lot of that.
Okay. And so at the end, I will give you the opportunity to give some contact information, all that, so that people can reach you if they need to. And I thank you for specifically telling people that you kind of specialize in what we would call, like you said, brown children. So that means that that's any child that is multi-ethnic. And it's a huge need. Our world is more and more, as much as media tries to make it look like we're dealing with so much more separation and division. Our world is actually becoming way more diverse and inclusion based. And so I'm just really grateful that there's a resource in our community such as you. So, like I said, normally we talk through myths and misconceptions pretty heavily, and then we get to tips at the end. Today I'm just going to kind of touch on some, and they may be ones that were covered before in a previous show about children and stress and trauma, but I want to make sure that we kind of touch on them, because we always find as we go through the conversation, things always kind of weave into each other. And so I'm going to start with the first myth, which is that it's really only military personnel that get PTSD, and so kids can't get PTSD, right?
Yeah.
They can't actually have real PTSD because it's a military only thing, right? So tell me a little bit about what your experience has been with the reality of children having real diagnosable PTSD? How prevalent is it in your practice?
Yeah, well, I work a lot with kids who've experienced trauma, and what I like to explain to parents and to other people who maybe aren't as familiar with trauma is that trauma isn't just about a specific event, so we can't just tie it back to being in the military or being in war, but it's really about a person's experience of that event and then their perception of that event as life-threatening or really damaging. And so it's not for me to decide what is trauma and what isn't trauma. It's really up to me to work with the child who's experiencing these traumatic events and having this kind of trauma reaction, and help them manage that, right? I can't help a kid avoid triggers because they're everywhere. But I can help them manage the way they feel when they experience the trigger. And a lot of that work comes with working with families and helping them understand, when your child is acting this way, it's not because they're really angry. It's probably more that they're scared and they're just in their survival brain.
Exactly. And I talk a lot with people about the fact that anger is actually an easy go-to emotion.
Oh, yeah.
Like, a lot of people think that we do a lot of service by treating anger. But I am finding more and more as a practitioner, if we put the focus on what is actually causing a deep-rooted fear, that's a whole lot more effective when we're talking about dealing with trauma. And actually, going back to the original point, the myth, you're able to spot it as trauma versus anger, just anger in an isolated place. It doesn't work a lot, in my experience anyway, to focus on trying to reduce anger. It's just like anger is almost the symptom.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
It's not necessarily the basis of the diagnosis or the basis of the behavior or the maladaptive behavior. It's not the source, right? So, prevalency speaking, if you had to put a percentage on how many of your kids are really showing signs of trauma as a disorder, what would you say that it was?
Well, on my caseload, I would say it's probably at least half, but I also am marketed as a trauma therapist, so I probably have a higher percentage than a lot of other therapists, and that is my specialty. I've worked with sexual abuse, sexual assault, I've worked on college campuses, substance abuse with kids, and so all of those populations have a high rate of trauma. And I think nationally, we're seeing that the rate of trauma is increasing. If you've done work with ACEs and you've looked at that study, it's getting worse.
And just for clarity, we always try to clarify for our audience because we want this to be usable by the unlearned mind, the non-clinical. So when you say ACEs, tell them what you're referring to.
Yeah, I'm referring to the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, which is a collaboration between Kaiser Permanente and the Centers for Disease Control. And so they took, I think they had like over 20,000 people in this sample, and they found that I think it was like 10% of them had experienced at least one ACEs. It's really, really interesting. And so if you want to know more about it, you could just Google ACEs study.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and somebody's asked a question.
They've asked a question already. Okay, so what can we do that will make an impact for the holiday blues? Oh, yes. So thank you, Markina. Hi. So we are going to get at a lot of tips as we get to the middle part. Actually, usually that's at the end, but we're going to definitely talk about what you can do, like actual tips, tricks, and hints for holiday stress. So stay tuned. Number 2, it's not PTSD. Number 2 myth, it's not PTSD. It's actually bad parenting.
Oh no.
Oh no.
No, parents, that's not true.
Right?
And that's not true.
No.
Yeah.
So that myth, it's the first problem I have with it is it assigns blame and shame. And parenting is stressful enough as it is. And as we were talking about what actually defines trauma, what actually defines PTSD, we now know that our kids are overexposed to stimuli that can become traumatic. So much of what happens with children happens outside of the supervision of their parents that is causing trauma. We all know, or at least we should know, and should be aware that the fact that our kids have so much exposure to media outside of our supervision, there's an overexposure. So to say that parenting is the issue versus real trauma that is happening when our kids are not necessarily in our care. So when they're at school, when they're online, huge increase in online or media-based bullying, for instance, and shaming and all those things. And shaming and bullying isn't always the same thing. The shaming doesn't always come from the bully, right? The shaming sometimes comes from images that feed them lies about who they should be, what their value is, those kind of things. Tell me a little bit about, like, just what comes to your mind when you hear that, because you had a strong reaction.
Well, I think, obviously I know that there are things that some parents do that do traumatize their children, and I've dealt with that, but I don't think that a child's reaction to trauma necessarily has to do with parenting. I do think there are things that parents and caregivers can do to kind of mitigate some of those trauma reactions, and so that might be things like helping their child build resilience through healthy attachment and consistent routines and rituals, and feeling like this kid is safe even when they go out and experience something scary. They know there's a safe place that they can go, and so that has a lot to do with parenting styles and parenting skills. But I wouldn't say that parents are to blame for trauma unless they really are and they have done something. But you're right. I think kids spend so much time outside of the care of their parents, and also even when they are with their parents, are they really being supervised online or in front of their screens, that kind of thing. And there's also been lots of research coming out now about how screen time affects the way kids experience dopamine levels in their brain and how that feeds into that addiction process in their brain. So I think there's a lot that goes into the screen time, and that's a whole other topic. I don't know. But that's the
privilege of having this format in order to have these talks, because even a lot of times we as adults and caregivers, parents, we don't understand things that cause brain chemistry, which is kind of what you're talking about when you're talking about dopamine releases. We don't really know that we should be concerned about those things unless someone tells us. So, third myth, kids don't remember what happened to them when they were babies or when they were younger. So, they don't really have a strong memory. So how could that really be affecting their sense of being unsafe? Which for me, trauma at a very base level is a sense of feeling very unsafe. But that's one of the myths. That it can't be an issue. If something happened, they had a great life after maybe they were adopted or parents maybe got their act together, then surely they can't still be.
I mean, that will help. Definitely, those things would help. But I went to, Bruce Perry was here in Kansas City this summer, and I got to go hear him talk. And he's this Bruce Perry's this brilliant doctor in Texas, and he runs something called the Child Trauma Academy. And he has done really, really cool research on how traumatic events and adverse childhood experiences affect the brain. And so what he was saying is that all the research is showing us that if a child experiences trauma in that first 18 months of life, it is much more difficult to help them heal from that trauma, and it takes much longer than if they had experienced it after that first 18 months, because the first 18 months is so formative in the way the brain is making connections and synapses are forming. Like, it's just this explosion in the brain, and if the needs aren't met appropriately for a child in that time, it can cause significant damage. And so they might not recall the trauma, but they feel it. They feel it in their body, they feel it in their brain. And so there's a lot of really cool research out there about how the brain and the body store trauma for us in a way that's nonverbal. And so if you ask a child, oh, well, tell me what happened when you were 6 months old. Obviously, they can't do that. But if you expose them to a traumatic situation that mirrors what happened when they were 6 years old, their body will tell you what happened to them.
Which happens often, it goes back to the earlier points. Those exposures or triggers, as we often know them, happen sometimes when you're completely unsuspecting. What might be a trigger for another child is not a trigger for the next child. And so that's why it's important to kind of clarify a lot of these myths.
And even for the same child, they might not be triggered by something on Monday because they got a full night's sleep and had a breakfast and they've had a snack and they feel pretty connected to their teacher that day. But the next day, you know, maybe they didn't get enough sleep and, you know, something's just off for them that day. And so they're going to be a little bit more susceptible to being triggered and reacting and acting out than they would normally. So.
And you're going into some of the tips and stuff, right?
About Sorry, I got ahead of myself.
No, that's fine. That's why this is great to just have it as a discussion, because we usually end up kind of moving into the next part. So the next one that I want to go over with is kind of related to the one we just talked about that says a fetus. So when a baby is in the belly, right, in utero, they can't feel pain. The myth is that a fetus can't experience pain. But we know lots of research has shown that a baby in utero, pretty early, should I say, about mid-pregnancy for sure. They have done studies on parents, and some of the people who have done the studies are the same people that came up with ACEs. A lot of their research is so helpful, and it's so easy for the average person to even interpret. But
they've done a really good job.
They've done a really good job,
accessible to everyone.
Really good job. And they have found that indeed, when kids are in utero, just like you can affect a child's learning curve, make it way smaller by whether or not you read books when you're pregnant, the amount, if you play soothing music, all those things. Well, the opposite is true. If they're experiencing, if the mother is experiencing trauma, then that fetus definitely will respond and be born with kind of some of it's like I call it, for lack of a fancy word, the emotional DNA is altered.
Sure. Yeah, and I think a lot of that, you know, we know that a mother who's pregnant and using substances, we know those substances, those chemicals affect the baby's development. And when a mother is also going through trauma during pregnancy, there is an influx of chemicals like cortisol and adrenaline and all of that flowing through her body in a way that's not normal and not healthy. And so that, just like another chemical or substance, is going to affect the baby's development because the brain is developing in utero. And so we really have to think about that when it comes to, you know, the pregnant ones that we love. How are we treating them? How are we making sure they feel safe and connected? Because it does affect the baby's brain development and their emotional development.
Thank you for that. So, as promised, I want to leave some more time for a discussion about how to help. We've got a significant chunk of holidays that kind of go back to back. And although research has now shown that children and adults alike, the rate of overall, for instance, worst case scenario, suicide, we used to think that it increased over the holidays. We now know that it doesn't necessarily increase over the holidays. However, there are certain unique stressors during this time, especially as it relates to kids. We all know that most kids, anyway, are out of school, they're out of their routine, and for some kids, being out of school and out of the routine actually enhances their exposure to trauma or enhances their exposure to triggers, because a lot of our kids have their only structure during school and their only exposure, or should I say access to balanced meals.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
During school.
Yeah.
And so even for even for the kids who aren't struggling with poverty, still there is a unique set of stressors that happen for the kids, happen for the parents during the holidays. So we kind of want to talk a little bit about that, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So the first tip that I kind of just wanted to ease into this and just say generally that most parents can help. The parents are more capable. You are more capable than you know in managing the onset of new stressors that come during the holidays. I think a lot of parents that I deal with, they feel out of control. They almost kind of what I call they store up anxiety for the holiday break. It's like, oh my gosh, the huge eye roll, they're wanting to be excited about activities and holiday things. Some parents, though, unfortunately, having their kids at home creates a stressor for them because they don't have the resources for childcare. They're single parents, all of these things. And so I just really wanted to talk about that and then talk about ways that we could help parents, that we could help kids, that we could help the family thrive during the holidays. And so I want to first talk about setting up conditions. So here's the first tip. Set conditions for good behavior. What does that mean? That means set your child up for success, right? So the more we set them up, so know your child, know what types of structure even work for them, because each child is different, right? So some children respond to a lot of structure. Some kids are overwhelmed by too much structure. But knowing your child and knowing yourself, set yourself up, and not just, I would say, not just the kids, but the parents. Set your family structure up for success, right? Put some things into place that are going to lower the risk for disruption and anxiety triggers, right? So some of the stuff that I wrote down for that is like avoid taking your child to places such as the mall or holiday gatherings when they are hungry or tired. Avoid that. When they are hungry or tired, right? Because we know that Santa is going to be there between 1 and 3, right? So if we know that, then we need to set ourselves up for success. So making sure that we're not so busy rushing to get to the occasion or to the particular activity that we forget that we need to feed them on their schedule. If they are younger, they need that nap. Things like that. So go ahead and jump in.
I mean, I think the closest you can get to what their day looks like when they are in school, the better it's going to be. So obviously, you're not going to have a math lesson and you're not going to do all of that, but you want to get them up at the same time that they normally go to school. If they have naps at school, they want to go down at the same time they have naps at school. You want to feed them about the same time they eat at school because 1, that helps them transition into home, and then 2, that's going to help you transition them back to school later. It's not going to be such a jarring experience to have to get back on that schedule. So if you can keep it close to what they're already doing, that's fantastic. But like you said, making sure that they're fed. When I worked in substance abuse, we used to talk about being triggered to use, and one of the acronyms they use is called HALT, and it's hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. And so really thinking about HALT, HALT with your kid, make sure they're fed, make sure they're regulated, make sure they feel connected to you, and all of the rushing around to do fun family things, do we forget that maybe our kid just needs to sit and be held for a little bit, or read to, or snuggled with? Those matter to kids, those moments. And then, are they tired? Or have you been up late at grandma's Christmas party, or did they stay up all night because they're so excited about Santa, and then they're throwing things all over the place on Christmas Day.
Or their friends stayed over.
Yeah,
they have
so
like I call it the non-stop sleepover.
Yes.
Because I was one of those parents. I had kids at my house all the time during the holiday breaks, and it seemed like a non-stop sleepover, but it really, really affected kind of the flow of things when they got out of their routine that way. That's good. Yeah. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Halt.
It's a good one.
Halt.
It's really, and it's easy to keep in mind. And so for some kids, especially if they're little, sometimes you have to take them places when they're tired or when they're hungry.
Yeah,
and so keeping a snack bag in the car with granola bars and fruit and things like that. Healthy snacks. Because it's good for their blood sugar.
Yes.
And so making sure they're fed and watered, just because it's not mealtime, maybe they need a snack. They might just be hungry or thirsty. And so really checking in with them really helps them feel. And if they're old enough or if they're mature enough and they can handle some of this on their own, you can allow them to set up some structure for themselves. Letting them choose, like, okay, for snack today, do you want a granola bar or do you want a Go-Gurt? Let them feel empowered, and then they will start to do some of that on their own as they get older. So,
and that goes into one of our other tips later. No, that's good. That's good. So the next one is remembering the importance of routines. And so the holiday can throw a big wrench into household routines. We kind of talked about that already, but being more specific with that, it can play a role in anxiety in children. So to minimize holiday stress in your kids, as Brittany said, get the routines back on track once an event or party is over, right? And so it's really important to also incorporate what I would call resetting with intention. You want to reset, because there are times when you can't control what time or how late. There are times when you kind of want them, you want them to have fun with their friends or their family members. And so it's important to be intentional, though, about resetting with intention. So what are some ways that you can kind of talk your child, like, okay, yes, I know you have company, and just be really easy and relaxed about reminding them what time, getting them set up for that transition. Remind them what time their guests have to be picked up. What time, remind them of what time, the next day, okay, for the next couple of days, we're going to do this activity so that everyone, and it's really important that you kind of use language that's all inclusive, because kids are fed this vacation clock thing. So they believe that if they don't have the same kind of lax schedule, that somehow they're being punished. And you get a lot of pushback and tantrums and power struggles with that. And so what I found to work best is to use a lot of inclusive language, so we can get sleep, so that we can all get the rest that we need. So, and then make sure you attach the language that says that it's a positive thing. So if there's a reward on the end of going to bed at their normal time, for instance, things like that. Right? And so you also said, watch what they are eating. Now, everybody who knows me knows that I am big on the holistic approach to behavioral adjustment. It just works better to try to stay as chemical free as possible when it comes to resetting the way that we think and the way that we feel. So one of the things that we want to be really intentional about is doing something you said, which is kind of packing snacks ahead of time, right? So if you pack snacks ahead of time, then there again is not so much of this struggle around, am I going to feast on Christmas candy and cookies, which I have a hard time.
They're so good.
So good. I have a really hard time practicing self-control. And then I pay for it later. And so can you imagine what happens to kids' bodies when they can't necessarily connect why they're feeling out of whack? Right?
They feel kind of gross and it's
definitely going to come out as an emotion. right? So making
tantrum.
Sure
it's going to come out as a tantrum.
A tantrum,
Let's be real.
right? So that's a really clinical way of saying a tantrum. So you want to be really intentional about making sure that you're packing those healthy snacks, but that they're also involved, empowering them, like we were talking about earlier. Making sure that the snacks are honestly as fresh as possible. So you may want to go for like apple slices and cheese cubes versus Cheez-Its. I know that Cheez-Its are very popular, but as much reduction in processed food that your kids can take in, that we all can take in, the better this whole thing moves. And so that's part of resetting with intention as well. I think that kind of falls under that. Making sure that your child is up and moving.
Yeah. And I actually write this into a lot of treatment plans for kids that I work with, especially my kids who have like ADHD or they do have PTSD. It's almost like prescribing exercise 5 to 7 days a week for 30 minutes because it really does help kids regulate themselves. It helps them feel calmer. It does a lot of really awesome things for their brain. And especially kids who have ADHD, if they are getting exercise regularly, they're way less likely to be hyperactive in the classroom. And so we really want that. And then at home, I know the weather's hard, and so right now we've been really lucky in Kansas City. You can send your kids outside right now, and they're going to be fine. But if you're stuck inside, let them get on the Wii and do Just Dance. Let them put on a fun exercise video for them to do. You know, there's a really great YouTube channel called Cosmic Kids Yoga, and it's from England, so she has a British accent, which a lot of my kids think is really fun anyway. But she'll do like Harry Potter yoga, where she takes them through a Harry Potter story, but they're doing yoga movements at the same time. And so she's got lots of really fun things. And kids love Go Noodle. They use that at school. So you can also ask your child's teacher before break, like, hey, what are the ways that you give them a wiggle break during the day? And they probably have some suggestions for you to use at home. And so there's lots of different ways you can get your kids moving during the break, and you want to do that. Like, make that part of your routine and your schedule. You'll be glad that you did when they're sleeping at night.
Yes, exactly. Because fresh air in of itself, even if it's cold, is a mood booster. Okay? So even if you're being intentional about, let's say, a 10-minute walk when it's cold. There are some temperatures, obviously, that are dangerous to have your child out in. But for the most part, the average winter temperature, 30 degrees and above, you can do a 10-minute, make a game out of it. Make sure you set the timer, 10 minutes of tag, and make sure they're dressed appropriate. But fresh air is definitely a mood booster. Even sometimes if you're taking them to, let's say, an indoor place, and there are places in a lot of the local malls that actually are free. Especially for the littles, that you don't have to spend money shopping in order for them to run around these play places. But just the fresh air transitioning from the house to those places can make a huge difference, definitely. And then the other one I want to talk about is avoiding overscheduling. Okay, so as tempting as it may be to accept every invitation, right? It is really important that we keep in mind, again, the fact that a lot of the activities are adult-based activities during the holidays. And there's only so much stimulation that, should I say, healthy stimulation that comes from our kids being involved in a lot of the invitations that we get. So we want to make sure we're not over-scheduling them. I talk about that a lot, even in my practice in general. That is a big part of my treatment plans for families, is really challenging them to pick, for instance, when it comes to extracurricular activities, pick about one a season, and really no more than, if you're going to do like a sport where you're on a team, that lasts for several months. And so, we try to restrict that to really only a couple a year. But if we start factoring in the fact that kids still have like lessons to attend, all of these things,
Right.
and then we've got a ton of holiday activities on top of that, it just gets to be too much.
Yeah.
And a lot of our kids, especially our littles, don't know how to verbally express to you that actually what's going on is that they are worn out, they're stressed, they're anxious, and that is too much. So how do we see it? How do we experience it? We experience it as a mega attitude for our older littles, and then shut down, or a tantrum with the littles.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if you see a kid trying, especially for that kind of 10 and up age, if they're really resisting going to piano lessons, or they really are refusing to practice, or they just seem like they're not interested in it anymore, it could be that they're feeling a little burnout. And so that's a good time to take a break, or to find another way to get them engaged in music, or whatever it is that they're interested in. You might have to get creative with that, but
I think that's a really good idea. Yes, thank you.
so
Anything that you can think of?
I don't know, we covered a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, I think just keeping routines, feeding them regularly, and making sure that they are ready to go back to school. So talking to them, every day, like, okay, we have 10 more days left of break, and then we're going to go back to school. We have 9 more days left. And even if it's just a reminder in the morning or when they go to sleep, some kids do like, how many more sleeps till I go back to school, letting them know so they can start to prepare themselves for that, because I think then you'll have a much smoother transition back into the school year, and all your teacher friends will thank you because that first couple of days back after school is rough. So
and one of the things that I also wanted to emphasize is that empowering your children by allowing them and actually creating a space for them to help you out.
Give them a job.
Give them a job. Kids love to feel like they are contributing to the ways of the adult world. We talk all the time about like how much kids rush to grow up, and you can kind of use that to your advantage. I think especially at whatever age they're able to help with, and I'm talking about not just with picking up their toys, that kind of thing, because when they're home for the holiday break, they tend to use up a lot more of the general living space in the house. So as early as possible, make the household chores. And I know a lot of mothers, especially when it comes to like laundry folding and all that, they're like, oh, it's more stressful to have them help with that. Well, you can have the older ones help with that if they're not already doing it. But find a way to incorporate the kids in the daily routine. That brings down, because we don't just want to bring down the stress for the child, we want to bring down the stress for you, the caregiver.
If your stress is down, then your child's stress will be down.
Exactly. So we want to definitely include things that kind of help you out. And to that end, I want to also add that parents, caregivers, please be intentional to schedule some quiet time for everybody. Quiet time for you oftentimes means that you need kind of a space between yourself so that you can get some guaranteed quiet time. So if it doesn't add a stressor in terms of having to go through childcare and all of that, but a lot of times, even if that's the case, it's worth it. It is worth it. As a practitioner and as a single parent of 3 adult children, trust me, I know very well the ins and outs of is it more stressful for me to have to get a babysitter than it is for me to just stay here and hope that I get some time while they're sleeping. I know all of that. But it's really important that you schedule quiet, down, and calm time for everybody, particularly for the adults, for the caregivers. And there's all kind of creative ways that you can do that, but it is important that you do it. So, anything you want to say about that?
I think, if you are struggling with, finding babysitters and finding that time just to yourself, one way that I have a lot of parents have been creative is they listen to podcasts or audiobooks and they put on headphones.
That's a good one,
and they might also be folding the laundry, right? So it's not true downtime, but they can kind of go somewhere else in their head, and so then they can do that while they're still mobile. So maybe they're still kind of watching their kids, but they're kind of in their own world here. And so sometimes that helps parents to feel like they have a little more freedom. And you can get really creative. And if you do want your kids to really participate in the quiet time, then one thing that I suggest is you come up with some options for them. So during this 30 minutes, you can read a book, you can color a picture, you can do 2 or 3 things, and that's it.
Right. Don't give them too many options.
But then the hard part for a lot of parents, like with consistency, is actually following through with that. So like, well, can I play on the tablet? Nope. You can do this. You can, and so it's that broken record thing. Yes. And they will test you.
Yes,
they will test you.
They definitely
will. And
you
just have to say, nope, you can do this, or you can do this.
Yes.
And I think a lot of parents, they try something for a couple days and their kids push back and they give up on it. But I would suggest that you try something for 2 to 3 weeks before you give up on it, because most of the time kids are just trying to see if they can call your bluff.
That's right.
When they're pushing back on that kind of stuff.
And we have to remember that kids don't know what's best for them. I think we seem to have lost sight of that. They don't know what's best for them. We tend to give them too many options. Furthermore, we tend to give them too much leeway in terms of options, in terms of having input about what should be a choice. And we think that because they push for it, somehow it's better for everybody if we give in. But the reality is that has never changed. No matter what has changed with the way that we navigate through entertainment and even the way we sometimes educate. We have a lot of media-based things now, but that has never changed. Kids do not know what's best for them. It's our job to kind of guide them through. So when we give in to those options that are not good for them, again, it's kind of like feeding them something toxic. And we wouldn't do that. Like if you ask a parent, you wouldn't actually feed your child something toxic, right? Well, when we give in to children based upon their insistence on choices that are not healthy for them, then it's kind of the same thing. So the last one I want to talk about, which is so fitting for this time of year, is reminding yourself and your children what the holidays are really about. I find that everywhere we look, there is that overarching sense of heaviness, because we tend to think that this is a time to go just retail crazy, and kind of overstress ourselves, focusing on things other than what this season was really about. Whatever your religious beliefs are or are not, this time of year came about initially based upon a couple of religious traditions that go back to the foundations of America being established. So we want to remember that it's a time of celebration. We want to make sure that we are training our kids, talking to them about the meaning of the holidays. So if your celebration includes religious observations, if your celebrations include family gatherings, those are things that speak life to our basic needs. We have those basic needs, and a sense of belonging is one of them, right? And it's huge. So I find that, parents, caregivers, really make sure that you are taking the time out to be intentional about talking to your kids about what the holidays are really about. Whatever uniqueness is in there for your family, whatever spiritual observations or family traditions, take the time to be intentional, kind of put more emphasis on that, and less on the commercialism and the sense of acquiring things.
Sure.
And you'll see a huge reduction in your stress level.
Yeah. And I think that's another place where parents can get creative, but so they can, I know some parents focus more on giving experiences as opposed to objects, or they do like one gift and then they all do something together instead of exchanging multiple gifts. And so you can get creative with that. But I also think if you're going to be expressing to your kids the meaning of the holiday season for your family, that you are also kind of like walking that walk. Yes. And so if you're saying, you know, this is a season of giving and this is a season of, you know, giving back to our community, then you as a family need to go out and then give back to the community and show the kids.
That is so true.
Because they don't really understand words in the way that they'll understand going and doing it.
I just talked to a group of parents on this past weekend about that very thing. Kids learn mostly by what we do, very little by what we say. If what we do counteracts what we say, then trust and believe what you're doing is the lesson that your kids are actually getting. So that's really important. So this is the part where we kind of just talk a little bit about specific things that maybe either one of us might have in our individual practices that can be helpful. And so for me, I always just like to give you my contact information. The fact that I specialize in family dynamics, really, I have a passion for serving parents and caregivers and kids around this time of year, because I see such a huge increase in anxiety and even depression in terms of symptoms. And so just know that you can reach me at 913-820-2173. That's my direct office line. Again, that's 913-820-2173. I also can be reached on my website, which is www.abundantlivinglegacy.org. Again, that's www.abundantlivinglegacy.org. And then I also have abundantlivinglegacy@gmail. So you can email me all those ways. Also, remember that you can comment. If we don't get to it during the show, then both of us, Brittany sees all the comments as well, and she will respond. You can also inbox me on Messenger. I try to do my best to respond to those. It gets a little full, but I try to do my best at responding to those. So if you send a message via inbox, and I don't respond, please call me directly at the number that I gave. So, Miss Brittany, tell us a little bit about what you guys have going on at your practice.
Sure. So, like I said, I'm a therapist and a registered play therapist, and I work at Embark Counseling Services. We have 3 offices now. We have one in Lenexa, one in North Kansas City, and then we also just opened an office in St. Louis. So if you have any family in St. Louis looking for services, please reach out. You can find us at www.embark-counseling.com, and we're really excited because in 2019 we're launching something called the Nexus Parenting Group, and it will be like a private Facebook group, and really we're hoping to work with parents whose kids are struggling. Maybe they're hearing a lot of different things from a lot of different professionals, and they're trying to figure out in what direction to go. And so membership in this group will include a monthly webinar on topics like overscheduling or all kinds of things. We have so many really exciting things that we're doing with this group. But in addition to the webinars, we're also going to be hosting weekly live Facebook events where you can talk to experts like me or to the owner of our practice, Teresa Patterson. And then we'll also be hosting once a month something called Paradigm Storytime, which is led by me, which is where we're reading books. Obviously it's story time, but the books all have some social emotional learning, and so it's about how you can take books that you just get from the library and talk to your kids about their emotions and their feelings and how to regulate themselves using those stories. So we're really excited about that, and in January our theme is called New Year, New Parent, New Year, New You, New Year, New Parent, and so our webinar is going to be all about less stress and more fulfillment, and so we're really looking forward to have more people joining our group, joining Nexus Parenting. So
Nexus Parenting.
Yeah, if you go to the website, embark-counseling.com, you'll see a tab that says Nexus Parenting Group. Just click there for more information. And we actually ran a special over the weekend for people to get in for free, and we still have like 3 more spots for free. And then we're running a Christmas special. So between now and January 1st, it'll be $10 a month, and then after that, it'll be $25 a month. So,
wow, okay.
But you're getting a lot for that.
Yeah.
So if you have
Sounds
questions,
like it.
please reach out to me. I'll go ahead and comment with the links under this video, and I look forward to hearing from you all.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being
Thanks for
my
having
special
me.
guest
It was
today.
so fun. I can't wait to come back.
Okay, we'll have to make sure. Yes, we'll have to, she'll be our resident expert on the
I love
littles.
talking about kids.
Yeah, because we have to have you back to talk about kind of foster care. That's her other thing that she does, by the way. But for you all who have been watching, I want to thank you again for joining us for another edition of Talk About It with Twoana, where we discuss myths and misconceptions surrounding mental health, and we do our best to get you and your loved ones connected to the resources needed to live a more abundant life. I would like for you all to have a wonderfully blessed, peaceful, joyful holiday season. Remember that that is the reason for the season, for you to grow deeper and for you to just expand in love. I want you all to just remember that love is the thing that covers a multitude of all the ugliness that is going on. I want to offer that to you. That's a freebie. So if you guys have any questions, as always, go ahead and comment. You can comment on both the Facebook Live video as well as the YouTube video. My YouTube channel, I forgot to tell people, you can just type in Twoana Clark Shepherd, or you can type in Abundant Living Legacy, and you'll be able to pull up my YouTube channel, and we'll be filling that up with all of these videos, all kind of helpful tips, whatever it is that you might need related to mental health. Other than that, I just want you to all have a wonderfully blessed, peaceful, and joy-filled holiday, and I will see you guys back after the first of the year. Have a happy holiday. Bye-bye.
Bye.